ladies and gentlemen, to this afternoon's panel on After Assad, the Middle East and the New Security Architecture. If you've listened to the previous panel, we will make an effort to highlight different aspects of this very vast topic. My name is Anja Wehler-Schöck. I'm the international editor at the German newspaper Tagesspiegel, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome these three experts with me to discuss this topic. And in the middle, we have Thanos Dokos. He has been serving as the National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Mitsotakis since 2020. And to my very left, Lina Khatib. She's currently at the Harvard Kennedy School as a visiting scholar and a Middle East professional. And to my left, Volker Perthes, who is a senior distinguished fellow at the German think tank SWP and was involved in the peace efforts regarding the war in Syria. And unfortunately, both the former Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu and Abdullah Al-Saud from Saudi Arabia were not able to make it, so it will be the four of us, but hopefully you'll enjoy our discussion. So allow me to start off the discussion with a personal anecdote. When I was offered a position in Amman, Jordan in early 2012, a friend asked me, what about the war in Syria? And I said, with confidence, oh, I don't think it will be for long. I don't think Assad will be able to sustain it. And well, you all know how wrong I was with that statement. And during the 5 years I lived and worked in Amman, I got to witness the immense impact of the refugee crisis on the region. And I also got to speak to many people who suffered greatly under the Assad regime. So when the Assad regime was toppled in December of last year, I was absolutely thrilled. I thought, despite the cause to uncertainty with regard to the Syrian future, this was a cause for celebration. And so, Volker, since you were greatly involved in the peace negotiations that took place at some point with Assad, let me start off the discussion with you. It's been 4 months since the fall of the Assad regime, and the transitional government has raised great doubts among the observers in the West, and Syria has seen significant sectarian violence. What are the outlooks for the post-Assad Syria from your point of view?
Well, I guess you always, thanks Anja, I think you always have to ask, are you trying to lay out what the scenarios could be for the next couple of years? Or if we speak about post-Assad, you should say for the next 54 years, because we had 54 years of Assad? Or are you speaking about what is happening tomorrow and after tomorrow? And if you speak about what is happening tomorrow, after tomorrow, and the next couple of weeks, definitely we will have more chaos. We will have some ugly incidents, as we have seen a couple of weeks ago, with people taking revenge, with revenge-taking being ethnicized, or politics being ethnicized. So we had these acts of revenge against people in the coastal region, mainly Alawites. So I guess there could have been more of that, or many people would have expected even more of that after 13 years of war and 54 years of the Assad's dictatorship. And there will probably be more. And the Syrians have to work together, and they need support in finding a way of going through a transitional justice process, which does, on the one hand, what victims need, getting justice for what has been done to them, on the other hand, not undo all the chances of living together in this beautiful mosaic of different ethnicities and people in Syria. If you speak about what is going to be in 5 years and 10 years, of course I don't know, because we didn't know when the civil war started how long it would take, and after you and a couple of other people, including myself, before 2015, before the Russians intervened, have said that Assad is basically done. He doesn't have a constituency anymore. And I think we were right. He didn't have a constituency anymore, but then Russia intervened and Iran intervened, and it took another 10 years. In the meantime, in the 10 years in between, everybody said he is there to stay. And a lot of people predicted he is there to stay forever, and the League of Arab States accepted Syria back. into the League because they thought he was there to stay. And then suddenly, when Russia was preoccupied or occupied in Ukraine and Hezbollah was defeated and Iran was more or less defeated, then Assad fell within less than 2 weeks. So I think if we look into a somewhat longer run, of course we cannot predict, but it will be better than it was. I think the new people in power there in Syria, they personally know that if you want to rule Syria, you have to pay attention and pay respect to the plurality of the society, to that mosaic. I mean, you cannot rule Syria as if it was a state with only one ethnicity, one religion. It doesn't work. And they have realized it. They have realized it, and they got into negotiations with the Kurds, for example, which is important. I think there will be more of that. They will need support for it, but it's one of the places in the Middle East, plus a few others, where I'm, well, more optimistic than the opposite.
Oh, that's great to hear that you're optimistic, Lina. I wanted to turn to you. Volker mentioned the importance of different ethnicities and religions living together in Syria. A few hours after the ouster of the Assad regime, Benjamin Netanyahu said that this would create very important opportunities for Israel, and he shared his vision of splitting Syria into smaller autonomous regions. And the Israeli foreign minister said, a stable Syria can only be a federal Syria that includes different autonomies and respects different ways of life. Is that a viable path in your eyes?
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel. As things stand, it is not a viable option, and I don't think it's workable. I don't think any of the regional Arab allies of Syria want to see it divided in any way. And the survival of the current administration in Syria is very much dependent on support from the Arab countries that are, taking care, if you like, of the Syria file. Mainly here we're talking about Saudi Arabia and to obviously a slightly lesser extent Qatar and the others. But Saudi Arabia's role is crucial in Syria's transition. The last thing Saudi Arabia wants to see in Syria is a repetition of the tensions that existed under the Assad regime. And that's another thing people have to bear in mind, that under the Assad regime, Syria may have looked secular to the outside world, but it was actually run through a divide and rule approach by the Assad regime. So there was de facto division and lack of social trust inside Syria during those 54 years of Assad rule. Reversing that is not going to be easy. And creating social cohesion is more important for me than anything else, really, when it comes to securing stability and security in Syria. And so talking about any form of division as things stand, even if it's federal, I think only makes things a bit more tense rather than less tense. So at the moment, this is not a viable option. Now, as for Israel, I think this is a conversation worth having. Why is Israel alarmed about what is happening in Syria? Why are they striking, for example, in the south and elsewhere? One of the answers to this question has to do with the role of Iran in the region, because Israel simply cannot afford to see another October 7 happen. And for as long as there are Iran-backed elements in the region out there, Israel at the moment is feeling that it has no choice but to go after them. So dealing with the Iran file, the Iranian intervention in the Middle East file, is crucial for stabilizing Syria and also reassuring Israel. And that's, of course, only one part of the motivation for Israel. Another motivation has very much to do with domestic dynamics inside Israel, where, in a way, a continuation of war is beneficial for the current administration inside Israel. And then, of course, you have any new rulers in Syria are unknown to Israel. They had an Assad regime that had only rhetorically claimed that it was going to return the Golan Heights to Syria, when in reality it did not fire a single bullet at Israel. Here in Syria, there are Islamist groups. One of them is the main one in charge, but there are others that are aligned with it, but they are not in charge. And they hold a lot of sympathy for the Palestinian cause. And so for as long as these elements remain at large in Syria, Israel is feeling also threatened. So there are multiple factors that need to be taken into consideration. I mean, this session is about the security architecture in the region. So I would say the Syrian issue is one angle in which we can approach the larger issue of Israel, Iran, and regional security at large in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. So, Thanos, if we stay with Israel for the time being, Netanyahu ordered an unprecedented grand push into Syria after the ouster of the Assad regime, and the Israeli forces are currently deeper in Syrian territory than they've been historically. So, the current regime in Damascus has not really responded to this. When could this change, and what do you expect? Are you concerned that this might lead to a major escalation of tensions between Syria and Israel?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert on Syria, but I had the opportunity over the last few weeks to listen to very senior officials from neighboring countries. And I must say I didn't become much wiser, because they basically said, optimistic scenario, stability, the beginning of a reconstruction process, worst case scenario, a renewal of the civil war, and everything in between is possible. So I guess the approach for almost everyone is wait and see what will happen. Now, and there are a couple of issues which are of importance for European countries. One was mentioned is to avoid a renewal or revival of jihadist terrorism, ISIS or other groups. The other, of course, which is quite important for Greece, is to prevent or control somehow the numbers of people coming from Syria. And we don't want to see a new wave of migrants or refugees from that country. But on your question about Israel, I think the situation is quickly becoming a war of proxy between Turkey and Israel. Turkey has significant influence as we speak in Syria, which of course is something that worries not only Israel, but a number of other countries as well, especially the Gulf countries, UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are ready to spend significant amounts of money to prevent a single country from dominating Syria. Mm-hmm. So I think it will remain tense despite the effort of President Trump to sort of mediate between Turkey and Israel. I think the situation will remain tense. Now, I think it's good news that there will be an effort for a deconfliction mechanism, but whether that will be successful remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Volker, if we take a look at the regime currently in power in Damascus, how concerned should we be about their jihadi past, and have they really abandoned it as they claim?
Well, look, people do change. I mean, we had a foreign minister at some point who was quite radical in his youth and throwing firebombs and things. So
that's an interesting comparison.
So I guess we have, particularly in politics and in diplomacy, we do have to give people the benefit of the doubt, and if they say they changed, and if they start fighting the organizations they came from, and in the case of HTS, I mean, Ahmad al-Shara, who was Jolani at that time, fought Al-Qaeda and fought ISIS in order, of course, to set up his own rule. I think we should work on the presumption that he probably means what he is saying. Now, he has never said that he is a Democrat. He is not. He has never said that he is a liberal. He is not. But he wants to rule all of Syria, not just the Sunnis. And I think that is where we have to reach out to them. And he has reached out to everybody in Europe and in other places who was prepared to work with him on that basis. Don't expect too much. Don't expect it to become a democratic country. Where should the Syrians have learned that over all these years? And where in the environment, in the regional environment, would be someone who support democracy in Syria? Israel wouldn't do it, Saudi Arabia wouldn't do it, Turkey wouldn't do it. I would also look at one other thing. That is that they really want to build their country. The first interviews, statements which the new foreign minister, Assad Shabani, gave to international media, he was quite in contrast to his predecessors. He was not shy of calling Israel by its name, calling it Israel, nothing about Al-Kiyan al-Sahyuni, the Zionist entity, as the old regime used to do. And he was saying, we're going to have negotiations, and we're speaking about problems, and we're going to have peace. So that's not the classical jihadist or Islamist discourse which you expect. Now, does he mean it? I guess he would have to be tested. What Israel is doing right now is not testing the peaceful intentions of Syria. It is probably creating the danger which it is warning about, namely to have Syria as an enemy again. I also would not be too concerned about the Turkey connections. Turkey is important for HTS and for Ahmadinejad because Turkish intelligence helped them to move forward to Aleppo and then from Aleppo to Hama. So they got some intel from the Turks, and without that they would probably not have made it in 13 days or so from Idlib to Damascus. And Turkey has offered a lot of help to the new government in Syria, probably more help than the Syrian government in the long run will want. I think, and we have Henri Barki here who knows Turkey so much better than I do, I have the impression that the Turkish governments and also part of society or the elite have a tendency to overestimate their welcome in neighboring Arab countries. Anecdotal, I would usually ask young Turks, I mean young Turkish people, not young Turks necessarily, when they speak about Syria, there is a square, there's a place in the middle of Damascus, which the old name was Zahad al-Marjis, Marjis Square, and Syrians call it the Martyrs Square. So I would ask young Turkish people, you know why it's called Martyrs Square in Damascus? So would say, yeah, it's because martyrs fell in the wars against Israel. And I said, no, it's called Martyrs Square because in 1916, Turkey, or the Ottoman Empire, still then hanged there, executed the Syrian revolutionaries who wanted independence from the Ottoman Empire. So there is a tendency of the Syrians to want to be Syria and not a colony of Turkey. They would take the support of Turkey, and I think they should. But I don't think we should be overly concerned that they would voluntarily sort of integrate into Turkey or become a client state to Turkey. The first foreign trip which a new president, Ahmadinejad, did was to Saudi Arabia, and I think Lina is totally right. That's for him the real support he needs. Saudi Arabia is much more important. Of course, Turkey is a neighboring country. He wants good relations with them. I guess he wants them to give up the occupation of parts of Syria, which Turkey still is entertaining, and wants good neighborhood relations, wants investments from Turkey. Many Syrian entrepreneurs from Aleppo left to Turkey in the last 13 years. He wants them back. So there's a case for good neighborhood relationship, but don't be overly concerned about Turkish influence there.
Mm-hmm. So, Lina, let's take a look at the major power shifts the Middle East is undergoing. Iran has been significantly weakened with Hezbollah and Syria being weakened. Saudi Arabia is gaining in strength. Shara was born in Saudi Arabia and is forging close ties with the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. How do you assess the power shift in the Middle East that's taking place?
It's actually a historic shift. And I say it's historic because until the fall of the Assad regime, Iran was influential in so many countries in this region, either through its proxies or through countries like Arab Gulf countries, like Saudi Arabia and UAE, having to protect themselves from potential Iranian threats. And so either countries were having to come up with policies in anticipation of potential destabilizing acts by Iran, or were already seeing proxies by Iran run around. And that had been the status quo since 1979, really. Iran started cultivating these proxies abroad, and that was the landscape. And this, of course, was a huge headache for Saudi Arabia. Now, with Iran significantly weakened, Saudi Arabia is rising again as the leader of the Arab world. And coupled with this, of course, coincidentally, you have the administration of Donald Trump in Washington, which is also good news for Saudi Arabia, because the Biden administration, frankly, was a big disappointment regarding the Iran file. Under Biden, the sole concern was to return to the nuclear deal, but there was not any attention to Iran's destabilizing actions in the region. And I think this paved the way for October 7 to eventually happen. And it's not just Washington that wasn't paying attention, it was Europe as well, and the international community at large. This obsession with isolating Iran's nuclear file as if it was the only threat posed by Iran led to blindness about the other things that Iran was doing in terms of its proxies and other, of course, issues like the ballistic missile program. So now this has shifted. And there's a big opportunity now for stabilization in the region. And I know this came up in the previous session, but there is now a concrete opportunity to have peace deals between Arab countries and Israel. And this is not something that, was allowed to be discussed in places like Lebanon, for example, in the past. Now, of course, officially, Lebanon now still says we're not going to normalize with Israel. However, if, let's say, the Trump administration manages to restart the peace process and we have a deal on Israel-Palestine, then I think Saudi Arabia will be able to normalize, and I think this will create a domino effect of security deals between Arab countries and Israel in an unprecedented way. So what we're seeing is a huge shift in the balance of power in the region. So the moment right now is very important, and Syria, it was crucial for this transformation to happen, because it was what really eventually broke Iran's so-called axis of resistance.
Mm-hmm. Thanos, Prime Minister Mitsotakis mentioned in an interview this week that he would be ready to support Trump in expanding the Abraham Accords. Do you share Lina's confidence that there might be a normalization on the horizon with countries such as Saudi Arabia and Lebanon?
Well, one word about Syria, because there is a pessimistic view which says, all those groups that are in power today are basically jihadists. All they know is how to fight, so it's a question of time when the fighting will start again. And also, there is a lot of pessimism about al-Sara staying in power, but that remains to be seen. But I would agree with Volker that we should give them the benefit of the doubt, but this should be earned and tested all the time. So a tool that Europe has is the lifting of the sanctions, but this will have to be gradual and conditional on the basis of the treatment of the minorities and the general behavior of the regime. Now, I'm slightly less optimistic, because I can see on the Abraham Accords, because I can see the carrot and the desire of all parties involved, including Saudi Arabia, to normalize ties with Israel. and there is a lot of contacts and discussions below the radar. But I think, despite the control the Saudi regime has over the media and over public opinion, if there's something like public opinion in the country, but then it's still very difficult for them to normalize as long as the fighting in Gaza continues and there is no, at least a roadmap, if not a concrete plan, at least an intention by the Israeli government to start talking about a solution to the Palestinian problem. So I'm not, it will happen eventually, I mean, the normalization, but not anytime soon. And of course, there is also the Iranian factor, which is complicating the situation in the region. I think the Iranian regime has never been under so much pressure, perhaps in the early days of the revolution and the first few months of the Iran-Iraq war, but now they are under tremendous pressure. Unfortunately, this is a game where Europe is absent. This is between the President Trump and the Iranian regime. Of course, there is also Israel whispering to his ear and pushing for a forceful solution to the Iranian file. But I think it's a 50-50 probability that we may have, by the end of the year, some kind of a positive outcome in those negotiations. But of course, the other problem is the perception that the regime is very weak and under domestic pressure may lead to the conclusion that this is the time to try to overthrow the regime. And this, I don't think at the end of the day that they are as weak as they look. So this may end very badly for the region.
Volker, Iran and the US are expected to resume nuclear negotiations tomorrow. What are you expecting?
Well, I guess they will start talking, which is important, and we are seeing the reactions now in Iran, actually, and the religious leader, supreme leader, has changed his discourse quite substantially. I'm speaking about American investments in Iran, and that has been unheard of since 1979. It is not because Trump is prepared to have Mr. Witkoff speak to the Iranian foreign minister. It is also a reaction to the geopolitical changes which have happened in the last 18 months and the severe defeat which Iran had to suffer. Now, Anja, you and I, we are both coming from a country which, after several attempts to do the opposite in 1945, accepted defeat. We should probably have done that before and had a better history then. Sometimes it is healthy to accept defeat, and then you can start from a new position, and you will be accepted by your neighbors and probably even helped by your neighbors or by others, and you can build a peaceful future. Now, I would love if Hamas and Hezbollah in Iran would all say, well, okay, that was it. That resistance ideology and didn't help us in practice, and we cannot continue like that. And now let's start to build our countries. My impression is we have a couple of governments in the region now. I wouldn't want to call them regimes. Governments in the region who try to do exactly that, build their own country and not concentrate on undermining their neighbors or fighting their neighbors. We see that in Lebanon now, where Hezbollah is no longer the dominating factor that decides about war and peace. It's now the Lebanese president and the Lebanese prime minister deciding about defense policy and security policy. And that's the first time for how many years? Since, well, probably the 1980s. It wasn't always Hezbollah. It was Palestinians and it was Hezbollah. In Syria, we have a regime or a government which wants to rebuild their country, which wants to reconciliate, which wants to get control over the country, but it is not intent on fighting their neighbors. In Iraq, we're never speaking about Iraq, even though it's a very important country. In Iraq, we have had, after the catastrophe of 2003, We have had a series of, I think, 6 parliamentary elections with a change of government every time after it. I mean, that's something which we should consider. It's happening. It's slowly stabilizing, and they're not there to undermine their neighbors. They are building what they call a development road from the Gulf through Iraq to Turkey to Europe in order to build their economy. So we have a couple of examples here where countries start to concentrate on their own thing. And I wish, back to your question, that Iran has cut that corner too and realized that this is a chance now, out of the defeat, to concentrate on building their own country. I think the Iranian president wants to do exactly that. And that is the agenda on which he has won the elections. Build their own country, get rid of the sanctions. In order to get rid of the sanctions, you have to find a compromise with Donald Trump. Now, will they find that tomorrow in Oman? I don't think so. They can have a quick win if Donald Trump so wants, and they have a template. They have the Iran nuclear agreement of 2015, and they could, with a few amendments so that Mr. Trump could say, well, it's my deal, they could probably reenact it in a way. There's a lot of technical difficulties about, I mean, how much enrichment has already happened, what is the state of centrifuges that the Iranians have, what about the missiles, what about regional issues. I'm not sure that Mr. Trump is very interested in that. He wants a quick deal. I think it is possible that they start talking and that the Iranians would promise or would commit to arresting their nuclear development where it is right now. And that would give reprieve, and that would make it possible to slowly get into lifting the sanctions and for the Iranians to build their own country.
Lina, there is one actor that we haven't spoken about so far. Russia has lost its foothold in the Middle East with the ouster of the Assad regime. Where do you see Russia's role in the future of the Middle East?
One thing to bear in mind is that the new administration in Syria has already said that they see the relationship between Syria and Russia as a long-term strategic one. And there is no expectation that this government in Syria is going to ask Russia to abandon its naval base and military bases, air base in Syria. So here we have a bit of a clue that the military presence, at least of Russia in Syria, appears to be long-term. But there's a big difference between that and what was at play at the heart of the Syrian conflict when Russia became the most important foreign actor backing the Assad regime, because at that time the Iranians couldn't do it on their own. And so for me, I see Russia still having a presence, but it's not the same as what we had before. Now, having said that, Russia in Libya remains, a continuing issue, and Russia, in fact, does need the naval base in Syria so that it can send things towards Africa anyway. And so Russia has not completely given up on having presence on the Mediterranean. I think it feels, and this is for me part of the reason why Assad became sacrificable in the end, because I think Russia felt that it has achieved that regardless of whether Assad stays in power or not. And now with Washington wanting to strike a deal with Russia on Ukraine, I expect that the bigger deal will include probably more accommodation of Russian interests in the Mediterranean than perhaps what Europe had hoped would happen after the invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
Thanos, China also had ambitions in the Middle East that didn't quite follow through. Do you see that in the future, a stronger Chinese role in the Middle East?
It's difficult to see China, experimenting again with diplomacy. They will still try to maintain and develop an economic presence in the region, but I think what they tried with Iran and Saudi Arabia, although successful, I think the current situation leaves them little space to become a major actor. But if I may, yes, rational thinking would lead the Iranians to negotiate and eventually compromise. And I think the president is a rational actor, but the problem is there is a very complex decision-making system in the country, and there will eventually be a succession of the supreme leader, and this may complicate things. But then Volker mentioned a few glimpses of hope in the Middle East, and of course we know where the dark spots are, Palestine and Yemen. But let me make a brief reference to the swing states. So Lebanon is very important, and the experiment, if I may call it that way, we should make sure it succeeds. A lot of countries are sending the message to Israel that they should not undermine President Aoun's authority by bombing targets in Beirut and elsewhere, and we need to provide all the support we can to the Lebanese government, including, and this is something the EU can do, provide economic assistance, because this is still a country with a very fragile economy, so they need all the support they can get. Second on my list would be Jordan, which feels very uneasy with all the talks about Palestinians eventually finding their way to Jordan. And the third one would be Egypt, much bigger, not a weak country, but still there is an element of fragility because of the economic problems, a bit of social tension, a huge population. We need to make sure that Egypt remains stable and secure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Thanos. That's a very crucial point, I think. Volker, if we look at the short term, what needs to happen in order to keep the Middle East from escalating further and, on the contrary, evolving towards stability? Thanos mentioned Jordan, with President Trump announcing the withdrawal of aid and support. Jordan might be one of the countries hit the hardest because they're so dependent on this. What do you think that the EU can do in order to stabilize countries like Jordan and work towards de-escalating in the Middle East?
Well, what has to happen short term? We are back to the panels that preceded ours. I mean, the escalation or the war in Gaza has to stop. That's essential, because this, you cannot even say this is undermining stability in the Middle East. I mean, this is continuously destabilizing the entire Middle East. With the end of the war in Gaza, a lot of the things can happen, which Lina pointed out. I mean, the Saudis they would have an agreement with Israel tomorrow if they could, if there was a perspective for a Palestinian state. So you have to stop the war in Gaza. You have to have, as the Egyptians made a plan, we heard that about. I mean, is it perfect? No. There cannot be no perfect plans now. But there is something about governance, there's something about security in Gaza, and then having a political horizon for the Palestinians. And that will open the way to direct negotiations between the Saudis and the Israelis and additions to the Abraham Accord. It would probably also make room for a different relationship between Israel and Syria. The Syrians have no interest in a military confrontation with Israel, but of course they don't want Israel to bomb all over Syria or to invade into southern Syria. So with an end of the Gaza conflict, a lot of positive movements could begin. What should the Europeans do? Aside from what Thanos said, sometimes I'm a bit cynical here and say, well, either we should have a unified position or stay out of politics in the Middle East. In most of the essential political questions on the Middle East, the Europeans have neutralized each other rather than putting their strengths together. I mean, think about votes in the United Nations General Assembly, where we had 3 voting in favor of giving the Palestinians a different status, and I think 15 abstaining, and 7 or so being against. I mean, we are neutralizing ourselves rather than putting European strengths together and having a common agenda.
Lina, we're at the end of our panel, but a last word. What would you be hoping for a European role in the new Middle East architecture?
Well, I second what Volker has said. I think being present and visible is important because there are issues, not at the geopolitical level, but that may seem softer issues like the issue of social cohesion that actually play a crucial role in stabilizing the region. And I think Europe is best placed to engage at that level.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to our three panelists. Thank you to you for following our session. Thank you.